Welcome to the Animal Wellness Podcast, all about improving the lives of animals with better policies and practices in government and business. Brought to you by Animal Wellness Action, where we believe helping animals helps us all. Here's your host, Joseph Grove.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Joseph Grove. For decades, we've been told a very simple story about animals and ourselves, that evolution is driven by competition, that dominance determines survival, that aggression is natural, inevitable, even necessary. And when animals don't fit neatly into that story, when they adapt to our presence, defend themselves, or simply try to survive, we label them pests, threats, problems to be solved. But what if that story is wrong, or at least deeply incomplete? My guest today has spent more than 50 years watching baboons in the wild, not in captivity, not for a season or two, but across generations, environmental upheaval, human encroachment, and profound ecological change. And what she's found challenges some of the most entrenched assumptions in evolutionary biology, animal behavior, and even how we justify harm to other species. Dr. Shirley C. Strum is a primatologist whose long-term research reveals that baboon societies are not ruled by constant aggression or rigid dominance hierarchies. Instead, they survive through negotiation, social intelligence, predictability, and cooperation, often avoiding violence precisely because it's costly and ineffective. Her new book, Echoes of Our Origins, Baboons, Humans, and Nature, is not just about baboons. It's about how scientific narratives form, how cultural bias shapes what we think we see in animals, and how humans, especially in the Anthropocene era, as some have called our current time, have positioned ourselves as somehow outside nature rather than embedded within it. For anyone concerned about animal welfare, coexistence, and the stories we tell to justify exploitation, this work matters deeply. Because if animals have been adapting intelligently to us all along, the real question may not be whether they can live alongside humans, but whether we can live alongside them. Dr. Strum, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a fascinating subject to me, and it is one, even before I became involved in the animal welfare movement, I thought a lot about the connection we have to other animals, particularly those who are close to us. This whole dominance as the way to get ahead in life. What does it mean to be a human, and what really works, right? Survival of the fittest, which you hear so often, I think even more and more these days in the particular era we're living in, survival of the fittest, survival of the strongest. But a lot of that is very nuanced, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about what we do get wrong in all of that. Give me some high-level thoughts to start us off. Summarize 50 years, a ridiculous proposition, but just, what is the summary lesson you've picked up in your studies?
Okay, first of all, 50 years is a long time, and I've changed. The baboons have changed. Their environment has changed. Science has changed. And even ideas about conservation have changed. So it's hard for me to talk about what that progress is. But I have to say, when I started, I was really interested in baboons because they could be models for the earliest human experiment. And then I became interested in baboons for themselves. And I've spent most of the last 50 years trying to figure out what's going on with baboons. And now, at the end of my career, I'm coming back to thinking about humans with my baboon glasses on. To summarize, well, first of all, I would really like to restore baboon reputations, because when I started, their reputation, at least international reputation, was pretty good. And now, because of social media and a lot of emphasis on the conflict in Southern Africa, their reputation is terrible. So the first thing I'd like to do is to change their reputation. The second thing is that, as you pointed out, I'm reading a book right now that makes me think that some of my ideas about the dominance hierarchy are really because humans have imposed them. And so I found that males, instead of being focused on the males and the males providing all the policing and the protection and all of that, that they really had a dynamic hierarchy. And although there could be an alpha male, that male is not in that position for more than 6 months or so. And by contrast, females have an incredibly stable hierarchy, although I go on later in the book to reinterpret what the female hierarchy is about. So not only did females perform a lot of the functions that had been attributed to males before, they also had a very stable hierarchy, and they were the core of the group. So you want me to summarize it, but in fact, I will later on come to my reinterpretations of some of the baboon behavior, but that is already a reversal, as you said, of everything that people expected.
Right. Well, yeah, thank you. And it was an unfair question for sure, to ask so much to be, enkerneled like that. Let me start off perhaps with something a little bit, easier for me, at least, to chew on and digest here. So after all of these years, what similarities between baboon species and human societies do you find, most revealing and most humbling? Either or.
So, what I would have answered in 1972 is not what I'm going to answer now. I think that we shouldn't be looking to other animals for the origins of our good and bad behaviors of humans. We humans have developed symbols, language, culture, and cooperation, and we have transformed the world. And so, contrary to what I would have said in the beginning, what I'm saying now is that although it's in vogue to talk about human exceptionalism, from my baboon glasses, they are exceptional. We have, and I believe that there is continuity in evolution, but also each species has its own uniqueness, and that is what makes us humans exceptional. Baboons cannot, they have a golden rule, which is a social contract of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But without the ability to have symbols, language, culture, and cooperation, they can't actually scale up their society. And so I argue in the book that there is a social complexity glass ceiling that the baboons can't break, but that humans have broken. So I would say actually that if you want to understand human behavior, you have to look at humans and not at other animals. But I only got to that position by looking at humans with my baboon glasses that were formed over this very long period.
Well, now let me ask you this, because you talk about some of the differences, culture, language, cooperation. Those are evident in, albeit much different degrees than those elements are present among humans, but they're not entirely non-existent, though, correct? We do see plenty of evidence of cooperation. There are ways, if not baboons, certainly many other animals have to communicate with one another.
They're doing it non-verbally. And there's something very different about language. You can talk about the past. You can talk about the future. You can organize where you're going to meet. Those are all things that other animals cannot do. Now, I don't say that baboons cooperate. I say that they collaborate. Cooperation means that you have a plan in advance. There are lots of controversy about how you define cooperation. And for me, baboons collaborate. That is, they have this unwritten social contract. And I can see it operating. I can see how important friendship is for them. And I didn't let myself call it friendship until very late on, once I realized that it did share some similarities with human friendship. So they don't have verbal communication. I mean, they communicate, but they don't have language. They can't talk about these various things. They don't have, I would say that chimpanzees might cooperate, but that's where I'm saying that there's a continuity in evolution, but there's actually a uniqueness. And the uniqueness that I see from the baboon's perspective is that what humans do is really unusual. And I was just blown away recently. Well, it was 2020. The weight of all the human infrastructure that's concrete, glass, metals, timber, weighs as much as all of life on Earth weighs. And I don't believe we're going to break down any of that infrastructure. So by now, by 2025, I would think that, the weight of the infrastructure is going to exceed the weight of all life on Earth. But I have a very different perspective, on what humans are capable of doing. And that, building that infrastructure that probably won't ever be taken away or not taken away in your and my lifetime, is one of the things that humans have been able to do. And if you just look around you, you and I, well, me a little less, and I don't know about your life, but looking at you right now, I can see you just look around, you live in a built environment. And how would you get along without internet, without electricity, without all these things? I'm pretty worried about social media and artificial intelligence, but I'm not going to go into that right now.
Last night, I watched with my wife a documentary called Poop Cruise, literally called Poop Cruise, and it was about a Carnival cruise ship. I guess in 2013, when the electricity went out on the boat, and all these 3,000 passengers were stranded at sea without electricity, without running water, without adequate food. And it was fascinating how quickly their behavior devolved. So when you talk to me, when you just said, how would we function without these things? I suspect that we would suddenly manifest many atavistic attributes of our primate origins. I think we would devolve fairly quickly. What do you think?
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I think that all of the benefits of the symbols, language, culture, and cooperation, I think cooperation is going to come out to the fore. And probably, you will see more. I don't know. I actually don't know. It's whether you see a glass half empty or half full. And, I'm usually a half empty person, but in this case, I think that human cooperation will, reach out and solve some problems, but maybe, I don't know what the, poop crew, how it ended.
The poop cruise ended when finally tugboats got them to Mobile, Alabama, and they were able to rejoin modern life and not be on this boat. But there was hoarding. Fights broke out. And it was just fascinating to see how quickly the accoutrements of culture, such as we might be talking about it here, went away. And I'm kind of ranging on you because I read, oh my gosh, Viktor Frankl's book, In Search of Meaning. And he talked about this phenomenon, albeit from inside the perspective of a concentration camp, right? Because similar circumstance, right? They were deprived of resources. But his point was, that he had gained some optimism about the human spirit because in that environment, the rules did not break down, that there was more altruism. And as I try and think about what the difference might be, a common enemy in the case of the concentration camp, which foisted upon the group some cohesion, whereas on the poop cruise, it was every passenger for him or herself.
Well, and I also think that, that they're going to the lowest standard is what happens when resources are in short supply. And yet, when I watched the baboons during a serious drought, they don't fight over resources. They switch to being, from being, having a foraging strategy where they take as much energy in for as little energy out. They switch to a metabolic energy conservation. They only go to where they know that there is food. They come back and they rest. And these males who were perhaps fighting with each other over females previously are now lying down next to each other, with invading each other's personal space, with no tension at all. So, I don't watch baboons. I mean, I don't watch humans because they're too complicated for me. But from a baboon perspective, I think, humans are humans. So when you take away all this stuff, they're still going to be humans, but not necessarily baboons.
Much of human history, this kind of touches on your point. It leads to my next question, is a story told about conflict and dominance. Yet you describe baboons living under these constant ecological pressures of finding ways to avoid violence whenever possible. I don't really see humans doing that much right now to avoid violence whenever possible. It seems to me that we seem to be seeking out violence whenever possible, if not actual physical violence, certainly verbal, political, any other types of categories you may define. Talk about that distinction between baboons and humans, please.
Okay. Well, as I said before, I don't study humans. I only study baboons. So I like to say I would rather have a baboon for president than any human president. And I won't comment on this current one. Because baboons don't lie, they don't cheat, they don't exploit each other, and what you see is what you get. And that's why I think whatever it is that has happened to humans, because humans have, by having language, have really changed the nature of our social interactions, the nature of our trust. I even argue that humans can simplify social interactions. So you and I can talk right now, but I don't need to know your age, your marriage, your children. I don't need to know what you have for breakfast. And baboons are constantly monitoring each other because they have to, in order to make a wise decision, they have to know what's going on. So I think what's happened to humans is whatever these different characteristics involve have changed the way humans respond to each other. So that your poop cruise it doesn't remind me of anything that the baboons would do. And when I translocated them in 1984, I expected to a very resource poor environment at the end of a really bad drought where there were livestock dying by the side of the road and they were picking them up. They didn't compete with each other. They figured out how to fit in. And so I was looking when I started for models of human behavior, but at the end of my 50 years of watching baboons, I don't think baboons or any other animal can be a model for human behavior because humans have developed these things that change the nature of our social interactions and probably the nature of our environment as well.
You're listening to the Animal Wellness Podcast. We'll be right back after this quick word from our sponsor.
This is Wayne Pacelli with Animal Wellness Action. We depend on countless people like you to support our fight for animals. Join us today by donating to further our campaigns to spare countless animals from cruel and needless pharmaceutical tests. Put an end to animal fighting. Liberate farm animals from extreme confinement and so many others. Become a donor at any amount. Visit animalwellnessaction.org/donate to join our fight against animal cruelty of all kinds. That's animalwellnessaction.org/donate. Thank you.
Now, back to the Animal Wellness Podcast.
Now, survival of the fittest. I think you mentioned that to most people, and what they automatically think of is strength, is dominance. And of course, Darwin may have construed that and did construe it differently to the extent that fittest meant adaptable. So you've observed baboons make mistakes, sometimes costly ones, and yet survive and thrive anyway. Does that experience change how you think about fitness, success, or even failure in evolution or in human life?
Yeah, well, I inherited this Descartes vision of a perfectly adapted animal, adapted to that, whatever the environment is. And so I really struggled with the idea that baboons can make mistakes, because how can they make mistakes? They're perfectly adapted. And yet I documented these mistakes, and that led me to think that it's not survival of the fittest. It's just survival of the fit enough. And I think circumstances happened that allowed these baboons to make it through, to survive. But I could imagine this alien cactus invasion going in another direction, and they were not going to survive. So I think it's fit enough, but you need to understand that there's history, there's contingency, and that tailor makes whatever it is that the animals or the humans, but I don't like to talk about humans, what the animals experience. So I really think that the fit enough gives more space for adaptation, more space, and yet it's still a problem that you might not have all of the right opportunities to allow you to succeed and to survive.
As you revisited early theories about baboons, Dr. Strum, you began to see how much human cultural belief, especially ideas about power and gender, shaped scientific interpretation. How often do you think we are really studying animals? And I think I can guess your answer here. How often are we actually studying ourselves through them? Are we able to be objective to a sufficient degree rather than subjective when we're looking at animals like this?
So that's a really great question. And I think, and I did a detour into science studies for about 10 years. because I was interested. I think that gender ideas, and ideas about dominance, come from humans, and they're being imposed on the animals. And I'm just reading something right now that makes me think that my reinterpretation of the male hierarchy and also of the female hierarchy may just be the fact that I had and my colleagues had all of these ideas that came from us, from humans, that we imposed on the animals. But I do think that there'll be many more animals that are as sophisticated and smart as the baboons, but they just haven't been studied this long. And so I'm hoping that by trying to do a bottom-up kind of study rather than a top-down kind of study, that I really do see the baboons for what they are, within my capability as a human. Whereas, science changed in like the 1980s, to early 1990s, from being kind of an ethological. I had 3 months that I could get to know the animals and collect data and throw that data away. Now it's all about testing evolutionary hypotheses. And I don't think that those tests of evolutionary hypotheses, will allow us as scientists to really get to the bottom of what each creature is about. And I think that's a long way of saying what you had just guessed that would be my answer.
No. Thank you for that. What do you see in your studies of baboons of tribalism? So it would make sense to me, for example, is again a non-scholar, that in times of duress, that groups of baboons would become more altruistic themselves. But would we see that same kind of cooperation if a different group of baboons, and there's probably a zoologically correct word for it that I'm not recalling, but another group of baboons were to come onto the surface, would you then see perhaps some of the aggressive confrontational approach that I might suspect?
So I've watched a lot of intertroop encounters, and very few of them are aggressive, but they can become mobbing of one troop by another and counter mobbing when there's a resource at stake, like a sleeping site or the Maasai have these settlement patterns where they have bomas that have lots of nitrogen on it, and those those become green when at the first rains. And so, if there's something to fight over, then they do fight. But they don't actually touch each other. I mean, this was an amazing discovery of mine. I had a filmmaker doing some early footage for a film, and we slowed down what looked like a fight with the two males screaming and saliva coming out of their mouths. They didn't touch each other. They did not even touch each other. So I don't have films of the mobbing and counter mobbing, but my guess is that those are signals that tell you do not do this anymore. And it doesn't go on for very long, and then one troop leaves.
Are they sort of like predicting who would win or lose? I play Risk, a board game, sometimes with my kids, and at some point we'll look at each other and say, well, you have this many armies here, I have this many armies here, let's not have the battle, you would win, let's part is non-combatants. Is that somewhat analogous to what you're describing?
I think that something like that does go on, but it's a lot more complex than what you described.
It's pretty complex, Dr. Strum. I want to tell you, when we're sitting down with Doritos and we're all amped up on Coke and other stuff, it gets pretty complex, but I'll let you make your point.
Okay. So where it happens, the encounter, determines to some extent who's going to win. So if baboons have only home ranges and not territories. And if the encounter happens in someone's core area, then it's more likely that they're going to win. But larger groups dominate or win over smaller groups. And then it's not just the number of males, of large males. It's the number of large males of different age classes. So I've seen, I've been with the group long enough that I've seen cases where one of the groups has the same size as the other, but it's the number of males and their age that determines whether who leaves and who stays.
So it's an interesting sort of mathematics going on at one level, right? I mean, each side kind of calculating in a way what the other side brings to bear.
Yeah. I think that's right. I just don't know how they do it because I don't see them. I only have the data and, who grooms whom and what the demography is of each troop and the outcome and whether there's a resource. And that's my conclusion from that. But it's still a speculation because I don't really I can't get inside the heads of baboons yet.
Right. Well, you may, given some of the advances we're making in neurotechnology and things like that, you may yet. So thinking about the role of dominance and success, and however we might define success, the ability to sire children, the ability to collect resources, the extent to which they're commingled. I am tempted. I understand this is not your focus, but I am tempted, as we talk about it, to think about how dominance, as it may be defined, plays out in human relationships. Because certainly we're familiar with the quintessential tough guy, right? The bad boy. And a guy like that may have some success in getting, the cheerleader in high school or the homecoming queen in college. But it seems to me that the men in humans, the males in humans who do better are those who are able to gather resources, but also cooperate, collaborate, build relationships, provide kind of a broader network that isn't so likely to be challenged in a set of fisticuffs at some point along the way. That the dominance, as we might describe it, with a leather jacket and a pack of cigarettes rolled up in the shirt sleeve, may work for a little bit, but broader, that kind of cooperation and resource allocation that I'm hearing you describe among the baboons may be better. Do you see that kind of playing out in mate selection, female to male, in baboons, and who gets to leave a greater genetic breadcrumb trail in the universe?
So my first question is, what metric do we use? Do we use surviving infants to 2 years of age? Do we use their infants, 10 years later and their infants 10 years later? And I just don't, I know that that's what, the genetics is based on, but I don't really have a sense of that. What I do see is two things. One is baboons hate unpredictability. So a male who comes in, is unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to do. And therefore he becomes dominant because he can lord it over all of them. But remember what I said, the dominant, the alpha, every male goes through that social progression. And so as he becomes more familiar, to the group, he also begins to create friendships. And if you look at consorts, you see such a real difference between the males who are with a female who is a friend and the male who is with a female who's not a friend. Because if she's a very hot female, the pair will have other males as followers and hoping to turn over the consort so that one of them can get it. But if she's a friend, he can turn around and devote all his attention to the followers, because he can count on her staying close. Whereas if he's not with a friend, he has to divide his attention between that female and the followers. And it's really much harder to turn over a consort, which is the prelude to any kind of copulation or possibly infant, when it's a friend than when it's not a friend. So, I think friendship is a key. And I talk about social strategies of competition and defense, which are based on friendships. And that's the complexity that I see in baboons. And I can't really talk about humans because I don't believe that we can look to other animals for understanding either our best or our worst behavior. And so I have to, that's like a cop out. But I have to do it because that's my position now.
Yeah. Well, and I certainly appreciate that. And as is obvious, I have to confess to not being so evolved yet. I do find myself very, very tempted to find, iterations of animal behavior in humans and vice versa. And that's a paradigm, that I think is really over applied these days. Evolutionary biology, it's very easy, I think, for people to do that and find bits of data that they can use then to justify something happening or not happening. But to me, it remains a fascinating subject, and I do look for things that may be gold and not merely pyrite as I pick up these nuggets and look at them. So it's fascinating. So pivoting now to just one other issue. I was in a forest nearby to where I live, which is in a major metropolitan area, and I became frustrated because even inside the woods, as secluded as I thought they were, I could still hear airplanes flying overhead, and I could hear, if the wind was right, trucks on the highway. And I was a bit aggrieved at first because I thought these sounds are disrupting my sounds of nature. But really, they are nature, our own nature, right? So it's very easy to exclude ourselves from nature, but what is really so different from our hearing a sound of an airplane, perhaps, than one bird hearing the sound of another bird? It's all nature, right? So I guess where I'm going is a question that you argue that humans were never truly outside nature, even though we often act as if we are. What do you think we misunderstand practically and ethically when we draw a sharp line between ourselves and other animals?
Okay. So first I have to say that the position I'm arguing for is not a common position. So, what you are doing is what is the general pattern, both for evolutionary biologists, anthropologists, and for the public. And if you read any of the scientific literature, what you find is that they're all trying to make a link between animals and humans, or between climate change and what has happened before. So that I don't think you should have any doubts about your own performance. I really changed my idea about humans being outside of nature when I read the paper on the human infrastructure. I think if you look at modern humans, we have taken and taken and taken without asking nature anything. And I really think that the only solution is going to be coexistence, which requires compromise. And it's something that humans have not done anywhere. So nature is a cultural construction. And even if you look at the Western ideas of nature, in Victorian times, the Animal Estate by Harriet Ridvo talks about how Victorian English people looked down on the French for the way they were treating animals. And of course, then it goes on from there. So I've had an opportunity in Kenya to really experience how different cultures see our relationship to what they call nature. And for the ones that I've lived next to, Kikuyu farmers, and also Maasai pastoralists, the farmers do have a division between humans and nature. The pastoralists don't. They're in nature and they have no division. And so whatever you think nature is, it's really a cultural construction that has a history and it has a presence as well. And so I've been troubled by animal welfare and animal rights issues. And I've thought a lot about them because we want to give animals rights, but the human rights came out of the idea of responsibility. And it's more about who's going to decide who's responsible. So, if elephants or baboons destroy a crop, a small-hold crop, are they responsible? If a baboon kills a young Thompson's gazelle, is he responsible? What about predators and prey? I don't know. And I think about, as I age, my feelings about other animals have changed. I mean, I started out feeling like the baboons. I never called them my baboons, but I felt much closer to the baboons. And then I had an experience with a farmer and realized I hated the farmers, but that was wrong. There had to be a way for the baboons and the farmers to coexist. But, I feel hypocritical in extending the protection to lots of other animals because we kill diseases and we kill pests. And that, I just don't know how to resolve that, except that, of course, animal rights and human rights are different. And I had a really strong animal welfare, animal rights person come out to talk to the guys who work for me. And at the end of her discussion, they shook their head and said, "We don't have any of those rights here in Kenya. Where are the human rights that you're trying to propose?" And that really stopped me cold in thinking about where is the dividing line. And not only is nature a cultural construction, but so is animal welfare, animal rights, and animal conservation.
Dr. Strum, is there anything I've not asked you that you would like to discuss before we wrap up?
We have to redo the baseline for human evolution, for the early human part of the experiment, because up until now, humans have invented everything, but it's so clear that they started from a baboon-like. I mean, I can't believe that early humans were less smart than these baboons are. And so they added on top of that, but what they added was so liberating, I think, that they're now standing outside of nature, even though I know that we being us Westerners, have not asked nature for anything. We've just continued to take it without asking. So that was my concluding idea, that because baboons are so smart and sophisticated, I think that they say, to me at least, that we need to rethink what humans were when they started.
Thank you for listening to the Animal Wellness Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and follow Animal Wellness Action on Facebook, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. To stay current with all of our news and information, and to take action to help animals, sign up at animalwellnessaction.org. Until next time, remember, helping animals helps us all.